Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well and staying healthy. This is the second of four videos in the judicial branch stuff that'll kind of take you through your packet. So if you look in your note packet where it says video 2, the appointment process for federal judges, it's just one page. That's what this video is sort of going to relate to. All right, so we talked about a lot of the background information that goes along with the judicial branch. This is going to be more focused on how federal judges actually get their jobs, which, to be honest, is something that we've already talked about a little bit as we've gone through the year. Right, we already did this a little bit, in the executive branch stuff. So, how does a judge get their job? It doesn't matter if this one says Supreme Court, but it's really all federal court positions. There are lots of federal judges. There's only 9 Supreme Court judges. So this is for all federal judges, how they get their jobs. So there's 4 steps, right? The first one that we talked about, obviously, in the executive branch unit is the president nominates a candidate. The only way that the president would get to do this if another judge that previously held the position dies or resigns or quits or whatever, the president then has the ability to nominate a replacement. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is that the Senate Judiciary Committee gets to actually interview and sort of review the president's nominee. So we talked about how Congress, the House and the Senate, divide themselves up into different committees, almost groups. The Senate Judiciary Committee is one of those committees that senators really want to be on. There's 22 members on this committee. And remember, we talked about the fact that every one of the committees is led by the majority party. So the Republicans are the majority party in the Senate. So the chairperson of the Senate Judiciary Committee is Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. There are 22 senators on the Judiciary Committee, and there are a majority Republican, right? And there are some high-profile people, including a couple people that ran for president, like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, that are part of this committee, right? So it's a pretty prestigious committee. Their job is to actually bring the nominee before them and actually interview them. They might ask them questions about their qualifications or decisions they made in the past if they were previously a judge. So that's step number 2, is actually putting them through an interview process. Step number 3 is that those 22 members of the Judiciary Committee will actually put forth a recommendation to the entire Senate. They'll either say yes, we recommend the president's nominee, or no, we don't, or we're not really going to recommend or not recommend, right? We're sort of just going to let it be. And they sort of advise the rest of the Senate. So the third step is really the recommendation that the Judiciary Committee gives to the rest of the Senate, because there's only 22 people that are actually on that Judiciary Committee. Step number 4 is actually holding a vote amongst all of the senators. All 100 now get to vote. And for a nominee to actually be confirmed and get the job, it requires a majority vote, which is 51 votes. So 51 votes, and you go from being the nominee to the person that actually gets to hold the job. All right. So for a long portion of American history, these confirmation hearings and votes were really not that big of a deal. More often than not, the president would nominate somebody, and then the Senate would just vote to agree, because they were generally voting on whether or not the person was going to be qualified. That kind of all changed in 1987 when Ronald Reagan, towards the end of his presidency, tried to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court by nominating this guy here. His name was Robert Bork. And the Democrats were the majority in the Senate at the time, and they actually voted Bork down. They chose not to confirm him, not because he wasn't a qualified judge, but they didn't agree with many of the controversial, political stances he had taken on issues. So he was really one of the first nominees to be voted down because other politicians didn't like him and what he stood for. And this is a clip from the news in 1987 that sort of focuses a little bit on the dispute between the Democrats and Republicans over Bork. Reagan was Republican, and the Democrats in the Senate largely opposed his nominee. Notice this guy right here is currently the front runner for the Democrats running for president, Joe Biden. Looks a lot different, a little bit younger. Talking about 1987 here. All right, so this is a clip from the news in 87.
Robert Bork nomination ended today. The Senate voted by an overwhelming 58-42 margin to reject the controversial appointment. Judy Woodruff ends our special coverage of the Bork story. Judy?
The fact that the outcome of the vote was expected all along didn't make the final hours of the Bork debate any less contentious. Right down to the wire, Bork supporters continued to charge that their man had been grossly maligned by the opposition, while critics insisted that a fair airing of Bork's views had taken place. At several points during today's debate on the Senate floor, Judiciary Committee Chairman, Democrat Joseph Biden, responded heatedly to statements like this one from Republican Senator James McClure.
There are members of this body who are desperate, absolutely desperate, to keep from the American people the real story of what has happened here, just as the real record of Robert Bork has been kept from the American people. If our constituents only knew, if they only knew how few of us took the time to look at the record before leaping to opposition, if they only knew how some of us walked onto this floor and parroted the very same distortions and lies that were exploded as false during the hearings and before and after the hearings. If they only knew how cowardly the submission to interest group pressure has been. If they only knew how all the contrived excuses and rationalizations have been used to explain negative votes. If they knew, I think a lot of us wouldn't be here after the next election. So it's vital to keep up the front. The opponents of Judge Bork have to stick by their guns and stick together. There is safety in numbers. Wolves know it, and interest groups know it, and senators apparently know it.
40 million people watched him. He spoke. I time and again raised the gavel and said, "Are you certain, Judge, you've had enough time to respond to the questions?" And when it was all over, I said to Judge Bork, "Now, Judge Bork, do you think you got a fair hearing?" He said, "Yes." "Anything else you want to say, Judge Bork?" "No." "Anything at all you want to clarify?" "No." Then the public opinion polls were taken, and then the American people said, Judge Bork should not.
All right, so that video just kind of shows you that this whole process of nominating and confirming judges from like 87 on is like everything else now, where it's divided amongst political parties. It's become just as like politically sort of like controversial as everything else. So up to 87, it was pretty easygoing, and from this event on, has really made this just like everything else that the two political parties like fight over. All right. So, like, what factors would a president take into consideration before you actually nominate a federal judge? Like, definitely a couple things. For example, party affiliation. Trump, if he's nominating a judge, is probably going to pick a Republican conservative, because it wouldn't make sense for him to put people in positions that have the ability to rule against him in the future. So generally, Republicans nominate Republicans, Democrats nominate Democrats. Previous experience, they have to be confirmed. If a judge isn't confirmed, it's kind of embarrassing for the president. So you generally want to put out somebody that's experienced, has been involved in the legal field, has been a judge before, those types of things. Age, like usually presidents would rather nominate somebody that's younger because they have life terms. They'll be in office for a long time. And, you know, Trump is either going to lose in 2020 or he's going to win and he'll have to leave in 2024. But all of his judicial appointments will get to be in office long after he leaves, and his legacy can kind of live on through that. So if you nominate younger people, they'll hold that job like longer. Diversity, some presidents have tried to make the courts a little bit more diverse. Obama got to nominate two Supreme Court justices during his years in office, both females, because he wanted to try and diversify the court a little bit more. And if you look at Trump's two nominees, almost unheard of. Trump got, in addition to all the other federal judges that he's nominated, he's already had two Supreme Court vacancies to fill. First one he filled with a guy named Neil Gorsuch, and the second one more recently with Brett Kavanaugh. Both of them are in their early 50s, and they'll be around for a while, right? So he went younger, and both are conservative Republicans. Okay. Other things the presidents may take into consideration, this is not for the Supreme Court, and this is sort of like an unwritten tradition, is something called senatorial courtesy. Again, this is for like lower level federal judges. So you'll notice like there are like 94 different federal courts throughout the country, and these are all the appeals courts as well. These like regions are appeals courts. The president is nominating all of these lower level court positions as well, and generally something he'll do is engage in what's called senatorial courtesy. So the president will first check before he officially nominates somebody with the senator from the nominee's home state, as long as that senator is from the same party as the president. And tradition holds that if that senator objects to that nominee because they're both from the same state, that the president won't officially nominate that individual for to fill the vacancy. So, for example, Trump's a Republican. If there is a vacancy that occurs within the Pennsylvania district court system, one of the lower federal court systems, and he wants to nominate some random person named Joe Smith, and Joe Smith is from Pennsylvania, he would check with Senator Toomey, who is the Republican senator from Pennsylvania, and say, hey, look, I'm thinking about nominating Joe Smith. He's from Pennsylvania. You're the senator from Pennsylvania. Before I officially nominate him, do you have any objections? And this unofficial tradition of senatorial courtesy is that if Toomey says, yeah, I don't like him, that Trump won't officially nominate him and he'll pick somebody else. They'll notice he's not checking with Senator Casey, who's a Democrat. And if that state doesn't have a Republican senator, he wouldn't even bring up the issue of senatorial courtesy. So this is again one of those sort of like unwritten traditions in the Constitution, or that's not in the Constitution. And again, you're nominating all of these different like sort of like federal court positions, right? And President Trump has already had the ability to nominate a bunch of like federal judges, 2 Supreme Court judges, 22 appeal court judges, and 20 district court judges. And that's a lot for only being in office for less than 4 years compared to some of these other presidents that he'll definitely pass if he's elected again in 2020. Right? All right, so that is how federal judges get nominated. That's the second video, and we'll get on to how the Supreme Court works in the third video, excuse me, in the next one.